school where they often have their first educational experience. And that's with the summer school in the city. And then by that September, they're expected to be in charge of a class, have classroom management skills which are essential. And because, as Lainey notes, class sizes are not shrinking, now more than ever, there's a need to really have a grip and understanding of your role. And none of these things are really able to be taught in a matter of weeks. We don't even have months in which these teachers are being trained, but we have weeks. It's unbelievable. To me, these are some of the most grievous issues. Additionally, I'd like to focus on the question of pedagogy. Pedagogy is that area in the instruction process in which teachers and their assistants are actually trained in specific ways to provide the learning, to provide and create the learning environment so important to our students. Oftentimes, the most expert teaching is that teaching that students don't necessarily recognize as even going on. It's that teaching in which the student has taken control of her or himself in that classroom, where they have been piqued by an interesting area. They are now investigating, doing the research that is so necessary. This is what we call student-centered pedagogy. That is an area that is not teachable within 3 weeks or 4 weeks, especially to someone who themselves is facing the challenges of standing before a group of students, a very tough audience, if you will, for the first time. How is a young person expected to not only bring skill sets that they have not been given, perhaps they've been lucky enough to be provided with some reading materials, but also how do they accomplish and overcome those affective issues themselves, those questions of attitude. So these are some of the problems that are fundamental, that are constantly skated over. If you had a real educator running the school system, this would be issue number one. We know this because people like former Regent Adelaide Sanford and among others have told us that there is no real education achievement gap. There are only gaps in access and opportunity, gaps in services. These are the issues that we found out. If you don't have the opportunity and the services that are necessary, you may have real problems. And what we found is that students of all ethnicities and nationalities are able to function much stronger when they actually are motivated, when they are touched in their core, touched in their minds by the educational, the simpatico relationship of what education is and why they are there in the classroom. When students find an irrelevance between why they are in the classroom and what it is that they're being asked to learn, there is a likelihood that you will have affective problems. That is, problems of motivation, problems of understanding, problems of a sense of themselves, and a willingness to struggle, a willingness to be persistent when the educational process is challenging. And what we want is exactly the opposite. So first of all, we must have educators who understand this, who are steeped in a knowledge of this, and who are not in awe of this responsibility. And secondly, we must have students who understand this. Additionally, I'd like us to look very closely at 2 or 3 student issues. There are about 4 or 5 in a paper that I produce, and those who are interested in seeing that paper, it's not a long one, are welcome to sign up later, and we'll see that you get copies of it. I'm going to mention the educational achievement gap and the attitudes issue. Very quickly, let me just read this to you. The educational achievement gap, as I said earlier, is an area in which oftentimes we're asked to understand the discrepancy or the disparity of scoring on tests or achievement academically of Black and Latino students in the main versus white students. And I will add also Asian students, because there is significant information in New York City and around the country that shows that Asian students are faring differently in the academic areas than Black and Latino students. We don't think this is something that should be either ignored or misunderstood. We think it should be, first of all, mentioned. Many times when Black and Latino educators have commented on this, they've been accused of, in some way, being prejudicial or antagonistic. That's not the case at all. We think that there's some lessons to be learned as to why students are doing better in some cases, as whole categories or whole classes, and other students are not. If you are serious about education and transforming the situation in New York City, you would be serious about understanding, recognizing, and facing that issue squarely. In addition to the educational achievement gap, I've mentioned the affective areas several times, and especially motivation. If you couple motivation, a student's sense of himself and herself, a sense of their community, with the ability to interpret both simple and complex information, which we ask students to do, in some way that is relevant, we could expect a great deal of difference. We want to see years of data that talk about how our teachers and curricula actually focus on children culturally, how teachers are responsive to students' issues and needs and are centering their educational approaches on them. Those are some of the issues that we have not seen addressed. I've brought a few books here just to prove, and I'm sure that this is a choir-like group rather than an oppositional group, if you will. But I brought some books here today just as examples of the voluminous material that answers the questions of how can children learn, how can Black, Latino children in specific do much better. There are books by Lisa Delpit, Baruti Kafeli, a principal with tremendous successes in some of the most challenging, previously challenging school settings. Danny Bernard Martin, a math educator who has analyzed on many levels both the socio-political dynamics that teachers experience in studying math, as well as the complexities that we must be aware of when we're teaching our young people math. And I picked math because that's one of the areas that students are consistently heard to say they don't like math, they don't understand it. And what we found is that when people see math as a part of their life, when they do things as did Bob Moses with the Algebra Project, when algebraic concepts, relationships, and the ability to describe mathematically and quantitatively relationships is integrated into everyday life, we find that students think of it as just business as usual, the daily grind. They actually like it. So that there are these issues that have been proven and reproven for now decades that are being ignored. The question is that ignorance on accident? Is a Bloomberg, is a Klein unaware of this information? Have they just failed to do their research? I think not. I think that there are other things going on here. Laney touched on the whole question of the neoliberal capitalist system and the motivations there. Additionally, I brought one book that you should be familiar with, Black Education. It's an anthology that has dozens of educators who have been focused primarily on Black student learning. And what they begin to provide for many of us is our roadmaps, not simply one process, but multiple approaches to transforming this whole question. So please feel free at some point after the question and answer to come and just take notice of this. My point today is that there is not a problem with respect to how we can transform the system in terms of what to do. It is a problem of organizing ourselves to take power, and rightfully so, from those who are currently misusing it and abusing it. So again, we would like to discuss maybe at a later time what we'd like to do, how we make this transformation. But today I hope I was at least successful in piquing your interest that there are some ways that right now we can actually engage our students.